maybe if that's the case, and the public, you say, is behind many of the positions you hold, maybe the reason that the public isn't necessarily giving full voice to support for you is that they find it difficult to live with some of the things you say about the United States. And your critics say that you consistently exaggerate the crimes committed, as you call them, crimes committed by the United States, and you airbrush away the failings of America's enemies.
And the facts are the opposite. I underestimate U.S. and British crimes, and I overestimate the crimes of enemies.
Well, let's take an example. I mean, back in
let me go back to one statement. You said the reason the American people don't vote for my position, they don't have that option, even if they knew what it was. That's not one of the options. The system is designed so that you have two choices within business-run systems, and the choices are a little different, and sometimes it makes sense to pick one rather than the other. And both choices happen to be off the main spectrum of American opinion on many crucial issues. So there's no choice.
But language is important, and when you, and this is back in '69 when your main focus was activism against the Vietnam War, you wrote, what is needed in the US is a kind of denazification.
That's a very common quote from the right wing. Do you know the context? Well, look at the context. It was in 1967, the Chicago Museum of Science, very well-known institution, had an exhibit which was a diorama of a Vietnamese village in which children could stand on the outside and shoot guns into the Vietnamese village. Okay? A group of mothers protested, and the New York Times had an editorial denouncing the mothers because they were taking away the fun from the kiddies who were having a great time shooting guns into a Vietnamese village. That's the context. And commenting on that, I said, you have to ask whether what the United States needs is dissent or denazification. And I would say the same thing today in that same context. In that same context.
Yeah, you did go on to say, in your opinion,
where you pick it up from, you know, the right-wing blogs and so on, or even the liberal blogs, all the context is eliminated. But if you put the context back in, I think the sentences are perfect.
Well, is there still a mindset in power in the United States which, in your view, is akin to requiring as a response, quote-unquote, denazification?
With that context, yes, I'd repeat it. Has the country changed? Enormously. It's changed through activism, which has tremendously changed the country. It's become a much more civilized country. Same here. Through large-scale activism. Its roots, you know, goes way back, but the major roots were the activism of the 60s, mostly young people, which changed the country.
But sticking with foreign policy then, would you say there is a morality maybe to America's presence and fight in Afghanistan, which was not there in Vietnam? Because Obama calls it, quote-unquote, a war of necessity. And he says to Americans, we are fighting this war precisely because your security in the United States is at stake. Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, the Taliban who protected them, these are people who want to destroy our way of life, and we have to combat them.
And he's not doing it. In fact, he's radicalizing the population. But we could ask a factual question. Does this contribute to defense of the United States? But that's not the moral question. I mean, you know, the Nazis could have said that it contributes to the security of Germany to conquer France.
9/11 happened, and we know that it happened because the Taliban sheltered militant jihadi groups led by bin Laden who planned it from Afghanistan. That is a fact, and as a result...
It's my belief, too, and it's the belief of the FBI, too, but it's only a belief. As they pointed out, the head of the FBI, 8 months after the invasion of Afghanistan, was queried by the press, Washington Post, and said, well, we believe that the plot was hatched in Afghanistan and implemented in the United Arab Emirates and in Germany, but we can't prove it. That's after the most intensive investigation in history. Secondly, Afghanistan was not invaded and attacked to overthrow the Taliban. That was came a couple of weeks later. It was attacked because George Bush demanded that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden and associates to the United States. The Taliban vacillated. They indicated they might consider it if there was evidence provided. But the United States refused to provide evidence.
So you wouldn't accept that what happened and continues to happen in Afghanistan with the American and NATO presence is in any sense just? A just war, a just conflict?
I think it's a very weak argument. Basically not. But in fact, if you want to know the truth, I think it's one of the most immoral acts in modern history.
One of the most immoral.
And let me explain why. That, if you look back at October 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan because the Taliban refused to hand over suspects without evidence. Okay, now actually they had a right to do that. You're supposed to provide evidence if you want extradition. At the time, the estimates were there were about 5 million Afghans on the verge of starvation. And the estimates were that if the United States bombed, it might go to 2.5 million more. In fact, the aid agencies, which were forced to leave when the bombing was announced, bitterly condemned the bombing. Take a look, it's across the board. Almost all of them bitterly condemned the bombing. Many leading anti-Taliban Afghans, including U.S. favorites, very harshly condemned the bombing.
I mean, you said millions might die within weeks.
I was reading from the New York Times report of the official estimates.
And obviously it didn't happen, but
look, to say that it didn't happen is irrelevant. When Khrushchev put missiles in Cuba, it didn't lead to a nuclear war. And I suppose some party hack would say, well, you know, it's fine to put missiles in Cuba. It wasn't. It was criminally insane. If the worst didn't happen, that doesn't change the conditions of the choices.
The point I'm trying to get to, perhaps it's best put in a simple sense by going to another internet question from a viewer of HARDtalk. Raphael Saint-Amour in Canada says quite simply, Mr. Chomsky, do you think the Obama administration should leave Afghanistan right now?
It can't be answered in that form because it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what the Afghans think. Invading armies have no rights. They have responsibilities. The prime responsibility is to pay attention to the opinions of those you're attacking. Now, if you look at the debate over Afghanistan, strikingly, one voice is missing. What do the Afghans think? Well, you know, it's not that easy to determine, but it's not totally impossible either. For example, there happens to be an Afghan peace movement, which is pretty significant. Their voice is totally missing.